They're on.
I will call the Human Affairs Committee to order at 7 p.m. on January 14th, 2019, here in the Aldermanic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman June Karen.
Here.
Alderman Patricia Clee.
Here.
Alderwoman Mary Ann Malizzi. And Alderman Linda Harry Gafford here, and our chair.
Thank you, I'm here.
Marie Worcester.
Alderwoman Melissa Golia is over in room 208 at the Capital Improvement Committee meeting, so she will not be joining us this evening. The
have a
first
guest.
order of business is,
We have a
oh, I'm
guest.
sorry, also present,
Sorry.
a wonderful Ward 4 Alderman.
You're just used to me.
Tom
I'm here as much as the
Lopez.
flag.
Okay, first item on the agenda is public comment. Anyone wishing to give public comment, come to the microphone, name and address for the record, please. Okay, seeing none, communications.
Tim Cummings, Economic Development Director. Carrie Skeeter, UPD Manager. R18-101, amend action plan to fund E for all.
There being no objection, I accept the communication and place it on file. Unfinished business.
None.
New business resolutions.
R18-101, endorses, do I have to read that? Mayor Jim Donches, Alderman June Karen, Alderman Tom Lopez, Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien Sr., amending the FY 2019 HUD Annual Action Plan by reprogramming existing funds to E for all. Motion by an alderman?
Someone want to give a motion so we can get this in the discussion phase? Alderman Clee?
Yes, I make a motion to approve.
Sure.
I make a motion to approve this resolution.
Motion is to recommend final passage to the full board. And tonight we have Krishna Manjaputi and a lot of other people. I would welcome you to come join us, sit at one of the seats up here, and we can have the discussion on this. Feel free to join us. Anybody, come on up.
We have
Sure.
plenty of empty seats.
Carrie, you can join us. Don't want to see any empty seats. I mean, this is big stuff.
Makes us look busy.
This is a hot seat.
It is, huh? Oh, hi. So who's going to take the lead on this?
Carrie?
Carrie?
Good evening, Carrie Skeena, Manager of the Urban Programs Department. The resolution before you is to reprogram some existing CDBG funds, prior year funds that either the project did not move forward or went out to bid and it came under budget, which is in the case of Salvation Army. Bridges is the other amount that was up to be reprogrammed. That came in a couple years ago. They had proposed a kitchen renovation. And after that, they started to seek an alternate location to do their operations, so they withdrew their proposal. And then the third balance of funds is our existing microenterprise revolving loan fund. That was created about 10 years ago now using stimulus money. And the purpose of that fund was to assist microenterprises. A microenterprise is a business of 5 or fewer employees, one of which is the owner. Under CDBG, they also have to be low to moderate income owners of the business. And the loan fund initially, with the seed money that it had, went out into the community. It assisted several businesses. I'd say a little more than half of those businesses repaid their loans, and the balance that's there now consists of repayments. It's been difficult for us to get that money back out into the community again. It goes through the Economic Development Department, which is 2 people when fully staffed. It's been 1 person for many months, and it's a lot of work that goes into vetting the business, qualifying them, underwriting them, and then managing the loan afterwards. So it's just not something that we've had good success internally managing. We've been before this committee in prior years to talk about replenishing it, to give more money so that we could, do better marketing and things. But other priorities have proceeded. So the fund has sort of just been sitting there, and we'd like to find a way to get that for its intended purpose out into the community. There's an organization before you tonight called E for All, which is Entrepreneurship for All, and I'll let them speak to what they do, and they have a short presentation on how they would use these funds to assist microenterprises in the Nashua area. So unless there's any other technical questions,
Could we get you to introduce people or have
um,
one of their leaders introduce people?
I'll let them introduce themselves.
Yeah,
I know
if you
some of the
don't
names,
mind.
I don't know them all, but
I can take care of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Carrie.
sure.
So my name is Krishna Manjapudi, and I'm involved in examining the deployment of this microfinancing into this community. So I started looking around locally and talking to some of the community organizations like Judge Corbin's Drug Court and the Soup Kitchen and so forth, and felt that there was a need for this. And as I was looking for it, I also met with some of the folks that were already involved in it. Stephen was involved in it, and so was Kyle. They were both involved in managing the microfinance money. And so once the need was identified, we were starting to look at how to go about actually looking for an organization or creating an organization that could take this and run with it. And it was Stephen's recommendation at that time that we should look into E for All because he had looked at it before. And so we kind of joined our forces and started to look at the feasibility of bringing E for All, which is an organization that's based out of Massachusetts, and have them set up shop here in Nashua, New Hampshire, to repeat what they did in Massachusetts. As the day progresses today, you will also hear from David, who is the CEO of E for All, and he'll be giving you a presentation about his organization and the tremendous amount of successes that they have seen in various communities in Massachusetts. So with that, I'll hand it over to Stephen.
Can you introduce yourselves as you go around?
Sure.
So for the record, and when you speak, make sure you say your name first so that the transcriber gets you on record, please.
So Stephen Michon,
Thank you.
resident of Nashua for 20-plus years now. And I've been involved with economic development and volunteering for the city around economic development issues for the last 15 years. Started with Mayor Streeter and the Business Industrial Development Authority. I was on that for around 8 or 9 years. Then with Mayor Lozo, I was on her economic development transition team. And then now with Mayor Donchis, I'm chair of the Rail Transit Committee. And you guys have heard a lot about that lately. But the thread that runs through all those is I've been on the revolving loan fund committee that Carrie mentioned earlier on in the conversation. And that loan fund actually has this pool of money in addition to the microenterprise phone dollars that Carrie mentioned. Actually has more than $500,000 right now that we're trying to lend out to small businesses and entrepreneurs in the community to create economic opportunity. And the challenge that's occurred for the last, I've been on that committee for around, I think, 12 years, I think. The challenge that's a reoccurring challenge is we can't get that money out to what I call sort of under-networked or under-resourced residents of our community who would otherwise want to start a business or could start some sort of economic activity to improve their economic prospects, but we're not able to reach those folks. I think Carrie mentioned we don't do a good job of marketing. We don't have the resources to market, number one, and we're just not really equipped to do it in terms of getting out in the community and really making sure not only the funds available, but actually the support is available to make sure those folks have access to funds and to build a business or build some sort of economic activity that gives them income. So what you're going to hear today is from E for All, which is essentially entrepreneurship for all. It's about inclusive entrepreneurship. It's about entrepreneurship for everyone, not just those who typically come to our revolving loan fund committee meetings and present in our they have maybe are bankable or somewhat bankable or connected. We're talking about folks who typically don't come to the revolving loan fund, or typically don't get loans from banks, or typically don't start businesses because they're under-resourced or under-networked, or just not part of the system. So that's the target population of, not the exclusive, but it's the target population of Entrepreneurship for All, or E for All. And so you're going to hear a little more about tonight about what that effort is. So I came to the conclusion, like Krishna said, we kind of came to this sort of conclusion together about this need for doing a better job as a system, as a city, and making sure we're connecting to the under-resourced, under-networked folks in the community, making sure they get as much economic opportunity possibilities as possible. And so this is that opportunity to do that. So in addition to sort of my experience with the revolving loan fund, I don't know if folks remember the MIT folks who came here and did their study on the Nashua economy. One of their conclusions from that report was that we have a very loose entrepreneurial system, not well coordinated, and the folks who don't receive the dollars or don't receive access are, actually they say there's a lack of connectivity to women and minority residents with the entrepreneurial ecosystem through proactive recruitment and more inclusive practices. So they call out women and minority residents who are not getting access. And that was, they did research to come to that conclusion.
Just to make sure I'm thinking of the right study, was that a specific region of Nashua, or was it a Nashua-wide one?
It was a Nashua-wide study,
Mhm.
but they actually had, they were charged, there was a group that worked with them with looking Nashua-wide, so it's the city, but also with some emphasis on certain neighborhoods, Crown Hill, Tree Streets.
The Mill Yard.
And, I'm sorry,
The Mill Yard?
the Mill Yard, exactly, yep. So
Okay.
you're familiar with the study.
Yeah, I want to make sure I was thinking the same
Yep,
one, because it was
exact same
presented
study.
to me like it was mostly the Mill Yard.
There was three segments. There was the Mill Yard, there was a workforce development segment, and then there were bucket, and the third was entrepreneurship.
Okay.
So I came to sort of this interest in Entrepreneurship for All, or new approaches to reach different folks in the community and build economic opportunity through both my experience with the Revolving Loan Fund, what I read and was participating in the MIT study. And I'm also, my background's economic development, and that's what I do professionally for the last 20-something years. So, well, 22 years to be exact. And so I have had interest, and that's why I've been involved in the different ways with the city that I've been doing. So with that said, that's why Krishna and I and Kyle, who's a banker in the community, and I will ask Kyle to maybe talk a little about why he felt the need for this opportunity in the city of Nashua next. And then maybe we could kick it over to David and his colleague Jeremiah, who should also introduce himself at some point.
Kyle?
Yeah, so my name is Kyle Schneck. As Stephen mentioned, I'm a commercial banker here in Nashua. I work with lending for businesses from startup to, mature businesses, anywhere typically from $10,000 loans up to $25 million loans. Runs the gamut, every industry, every types of loans our bank provides and I work on. One of the challenges I see in terms of a bankable customer for a bank, doesn't always come down to credit. It comes down to business acumen. It comes down to having a really solid business plan, the know-how, and the support. There are programs here in the city of Nashua that provide support, but as Stephen had mentioned, it's not very cohesive. A lot of the programs here that I do refer businesses to, they may provide a segment of the education that they need. Typically, they're on-demand services, so they're requiring business owners to reach out to them for help. And as a lender, in understanding small businesses and how busy they are running their day-to-day business, you typically find that when someone reaches out for support, in a lot of instances, it's too late. One thing that was really attractive to me with this E4All model, and I've looked at a few different models, having worked with different not-for-profits, a few things with my experience on the revolving loan fund, it's not just an issue of marketing the services out there. I mean, that's a big component of it. The beauty of the E for All model is, and David will go into it more detail, is they have somebody dedicated on the ground in the community, knocking on doors, going to church organizations, not for profits, every fabric of the community. That person becomes involved in the community. And I can tell you, as a banker and a lender who's always looking for new relationships, we're not really doing that to the extent that we could be doing it effectively, for various reasons. And so this is a model that really, as Stephen mentioned, takes the underbanked, or the people in the community who do not know how to access these resources. It kind of brings them into the fold on that. The second thing is I've found in my 10 plus years experience in banking is the businesses that typically underperform or fail are those businesses that are not getting ongoing technical support. And this E for All program, as you'll learn from David, really educates to the fullest extent people and their business ideas, and provides them with a cohort model to learn from other individuals in a network that after they graduate from the program, it doesn't go away. They have a bevy of resources within the program they can reach out to and continually guide them throughout their entire business. So the statistics are incredible in terms of how effective this has been in various communities in New England. Having worked in the Nashua community for 10 years, I understand that there isn't something like that here. And as a lender, I can tell you, if I have somebody come to me having gone through the E for All program with an idea, having invested some of their money into the business, I'm so much more apt to have confidence in taking that application and approving that loan, knowing that they've gone through that exhaustive process of thinking of every challenge and every opportunity that there is.
Well, that says a lot.
Yeah. I'm on record.
Okay, who's next?
Jeremiah Hernandez, Community Partnerships Manager at E for All. I'm here in support and a fly on the wall, but my experience thus far with E for All has been from the ground up as a first hire of a new program in the south coast of Massachusetts, New Bedford, Fall River area. And I've seen what the fruit looks like and tastes like, and it's delicious. And I'm happy to bring the E for All model to new communities.
Excellent. Okay, so I think it's on to me. So this is David Parker as the CEO of E for All. Actually, great introduction from everybody here. I feel like I can add details among that, but we hit on a lot of great sort of selling points, if you will, as to why our program exists. So I have, I think, two options in terms of literally prepared slides. One's a little longer than the other, and I want to, by all means, have discussion and encourage the alder. Do you call yourself alder people?
Alderman.
Alderman.
I mean, even that's a little debatable.
Okay, sorry about that. Encourage the aldermen to, get involved in discussion and ask plenty of questions. So I'm thinking I'll go with the short one and then give you all plenty of time to ask questions. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Great. So how do we get something on the screen? Look at that. Outstanding. Okay. All right, and that's my mouse. So what am I looking for?
There,
You're on the
over.
right.
On the
PDFs.
right. Okay. All right. So let's see if we can. That's short.
Short.
There we go. And does this have a presentation mode? Do you see a presentation mode? What do you think? Stay with it as it is, or does it get bigger than that? What's that?
Bigger.
Okay.
You can, as I say.
You can widen it. Yeah, there you go.
And
Full screen mode.
yep.
Yes. All
All
right.
right. Conquering technology. That's great. And are you two looking at the screen there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant. Okay, you guys got this figured out. So let me jump in. There's only 6 or so slides here. So the two things to talk about with this title slide. The first is just literally the title. So transforming both lives and communities. We look very closely at communities as a whole. Our program is designed to help a community to rev up its startup part of the ecosystem, and but we do it one person at a time. And so this example here, the person on the slide, her name is Daenerys. She lives in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and as you can see, that's her shop that she's in, with a very successful bakery business that came through our program. And I'll tell you a little bit more about her as we move through. But keep her in mind. She is a nice symbol, if you will, representative of the kind of entrepreneurs that we work with. And so entrepreneurs can really make a difference in these communities. And the main thing that we're concentrating our energies on is looking for folks who don't feel full control of their lives in terms of work. They're virtually a huge percentage of the entrepreneurs who come to E4All are in sort of a quasi-employed, quasi-unemployed state. 60% of them tell us that they're unemployed when they come to us. And so these are folks who are in jobs that may be on the low end of the pay scale, part-time, full-time, but like about to go, off that because it might be seasonal. So their lives are in a certain amount of economic turmoil, never with some consistency. And that's very frustrating and, as you can imagine, also quite stressful to go through that sort of a situation. And they look at, and by the way, a huge percentage of these folks have ideas for businesses. I'll go in front of a crowd of folks from just normal residents. How many of you have an idea for a business? And the hands, like over half of the hands go up. It's just the coolest thing. Maybe it's a pure American thing, but just entrepreneurship is sort of part and parcel of what people think about. But when they say, well, how many of you started any work on it? Then the hands come back down again. And that's the frustrating part, and that's where E4All comes in. We want those people to get the confidence to step forward and turn those ideas into actual businesses. So let me just say, please jump in if you have questions or comments, but I'll assume that you're not shy, but great, go ahead.
Actually, I do have a comment. So these are for people who have a non-existent business but an idea.
That's correct.
Not somebody who might have just started one up but is struggling to get
So
off
that's a
the
great
ground.
question. We do, on occasion, allow folks who have an existing business but are, to your point, struggling. And so the main thing there is that our program forces the entrepreneur, whether they're existing or literally new, to take a real fresh look at their business, understand their customers and the marketplace, all the rest of it. And so that's the most important part. If somebody comes to us with an existing business and says, I want to be in your program, we're going to push them pretty hard and say, can you handle people asking you whether you should have a different customer segment or completely change your sort of some major aspect of your business? And if they say yes, like I'm totally open to it, then that's a good candidate for our program. Not many existing business people have that sort of openness, but some do. And those we have accepted into our program.
Do you guys do means testing relative to the resources you offer or extend?
We don't, but because of our outreach, which I think Stephen mentioned, we're confident and it gets validated as people come to us. So in other words, we don't rule a person in or out of our program based upon sort of what their financial situation is or any other situation. We take applications from anybody. But we do then ask them to fill out forms so they can give us an idea of where they stand in terms of the economic viability, and we take that into consideration as we build our class. It's a free program, so people apply, and it gives us a chance then to work through the applicants into the actual folks that we work with. We end up with some statistics that I'll show you on a further slide, giving an idea of their backgrounds. So, but it's not 100% folks of one
I had a
particular
feeling I should wait
category.
for that question.
What's that?
Said I had a feeling I should wait for that question.
Okay, no worries at all. I'll keep going?
Sure.
Okay. So I wanted to hit right up front because I know that there are some programs in and around the greater Nashua area that do work with entrepreneurs. And I want you to know what makes our program unique. And this is a uniqueness, by the way, that literally is across the country. And we know this because I literally have been traveling across the country talking to communities about getting started with E4All. And we're part of a network of entrepreneurship programs that have been funded, at least in part, by the Kauffman Foundation, which is the world's largest foundation covering entrepreneurship. They have over $1 billion that they can work with. It's based in Kansas City. And so from that association, I have met many other programs across the country. And so these 5 points are areas that, taken together, make our program fully unique across, doesn't matter who you want to compare us with. So just to quickly go through them, as we mentioned, the outreach programs, we literally go, we can knock on doors, we'll go to farmers markets, we'll go to flea markets, we'll make presentations to other nonprofits and their members or the folks that they're working with. We'll try to build as much publicity as we can. We'll go to existing businesses because very often they get requests from folks on how did they get their business started. But the idea is to target folks who are under-networked, underrepresented, you don't typically see as entrepreneurs. Second, we have a cohort model, which means we aim for a class of 15 entrepreneurs who together go through a full year-long process with us. They come from all different backgrounds themselves. They have different kinds of ideas, but they bond quite tightly with one another because they go through a pretty rigorous and, in some cases, pressure-filled process. And when you go through that, you naturally look for comfort from the folks alongside you. So they form very close friendships and business associations, if you will, and that ends up being a very important part of the benefits they get from the program. Our mentors are really the most important aspect of what we offer to the entrepreneurs, and our ratio is 3-to-1. And so for a cohort of 15 entrepreneurs, we will have 45 mentors signed up. They are all volunteers. They are from the general community in person. We know how to find these folks. They're everywhere. You just got to ask and ask in the right way. They sign up. It's no small thing what those mentors sign up for. It's a weekly commitment of 90 minutes each week for the first 13 weeks, and then once or twice a month meetings for the remaining 9 months. So they make a pretty substantial commitment. But they, trust me, they get as much out of the experience, the mentors do, as the entrepreneurs do. And they tell us that afterwards, which is really very heartening for us to hear. So I'll leave it there on the mentors. We give cash awards. So for a cohort of 15 entrepreneurs, there's a pool of $20,000 made available as cash awards to that pool of 15. It's handed out quarterly, so over 4 different instances. So each quarter we take a look at what the entrepreneurs have accomplished, and then they actually vote for each other in terms of who they think should get the monies. So they are the most important component of that. There are others who have a say in the matter, including the 2-person program team, and their community leaders can get involved. But in the end, we think the entrepreneurs know best who has been really putting the time and effort in and making progress against their goals. And so we rely upon that. And then lastly, as I mentioned, it's a year-long program. I think maybe Kyle mentioned that there's support that even goes past that year, which is allowing them to stay in touch and encouraging them to stay in touch with their cohort, with their mentors, and then they get launched into the alumni group of E4All. We have 6 active programs now in Massachusetts, and the plan is to get to 50 across the country over the next 3 or 4 years. Lots and lots of discussions underway that Jeremiah and I are having with different communities. And we already now have roughly 1,000 mentors in greater Massachusetts that have signed on with the program, plus close to 400 entrepreneurs. And so you think about the accumulated experience and knowledge base there that every entrepreneur will be able to take advantage of by asking questions of subsets of that group. Any questions or comments on here? Yeah, go ahead.
There is not an E4All in New Hampshire at this point?
That's correct.
Okay. So
Yep.
this would be the first.
This would
of
be the
its kind.
first.
Okay.
Yep.
Alderman Karen.
Yeah. And how long have you been in Massachusetts with this program?
So we're just coming on 7 years.
Thank you.
All right, I'll keep going.
Okay.
So just to give you a little bit of how the program works, I assume you all are familiar with, and perhaps some of you enjoy Shark Tank. So think of Shark Tank in a very localized version. And so our pitch contests are meant to be a celebration of entrepreneurship. And so as a result, the celebration part is part of Shark Tank, but as you can all remember, the part that you often remember is the sort of sniping among the sharks, and occasionally they give some grief to the entrepreneurs. We don't allow that in our pitch contest, so therefore we call our pitch contest Shark Tank without the teeth. And the idea there is to recognize that the entrepreneurs who are competing for cash awards, so literally there's a grand prize of $1,000, and second and third places get money, and then and there's a panel of judges to decide that, and then everybody in the audience gets a chance to vote as well. And so there's an additional award based upon we call it the fan favorite. And so just imagine you as a budding entrepreneur, not ever having felt truly confident in whether your idea makes sense or whether anybody else is going to think it's a good idea, and you're standing at a microphone, there's roughly 100 people in the room, and you've got 2.5 minutes to describe what you're up to, and then you've got a question or two from these judges who were pretty intimidating. And so we just want to let them know that they're brave and that they deserve a lot of credit for sharing that idea alone. Some of the ideas need a lot of work, and so it takes a little bit of coaxing, but nonetheless, it's a really, really fun experience, and it draws people to us. By publicizing these events, which sometimes are for any idea, or in other cases, we'll have it tailored to a particular item, like food, for instance. Any food-related businesses are very popular among the folks that we reach. And so all the judges will have some aspect of food in terms of what they do, and many of the audience members as well. But because of the publicity for these events, we draw tons of people in to us. And that helps us then move to the middle of the screen, which is the Business Accelerator, because we encourage all of the entrepreneurs who come to us through the pitch contest to then apply separately to the Accelerator program. Again, we don't charge for any of our programs, so there's no money involved for them to pay to be in a pitch contest, and there's no money for them to be in the accelerator. However, we always look for at least a 2-to-1 ratio of applicants to the folks that we accept. So that gives us a chance to really sort of, if you will, grill the applicants to make sure they're really serious about this and dedicated and passionate about their idea and open-minded. So in the accelerator is, as I described before, is the year-long process with the cohort model, with the mentors. We also have experts who come in twice per week to talk about sort of the different hats that entrepreneurs have to wear. Very often people come and say, I love to cook. Like, I know I'm going to be a successful entrepreneur because everybody tells me that my dishes are fantastic. And they're like, well, so what do you know about bookkeeping? And they're like, I don't know a thing about bookkeeping. And what do you know about online marketing? Because every business has to be online somehow. And they're like, well, I really don't know much about that either. And then we go through all the different hats, right? So it's just, it goes on and on. You have to work with lawyers. You have to work with insurance people. There might be regulations. There's some aspect of marketing and public speaking and branding. Anyway, all of the experts are brought in from the community to share their knowledge with the entrepreneurs and let them know that there is a community of support to help them succeed as entrepreneurs. Just as Kyle was saying with his bank, that they would love to help these folks, but they need to find them, right? And that's what we do. We find these folks and we bring them into the system, the ecosystem, and let them gain their confidence that they can actually pull this off. So that's what goes on in the accelerator. And the net result is businesses. That's the goal of the program, as fast as possible to get these entrepreneurs to take their idea and launch it right away. Because there's nothing as exciting as when you get your first dollar from a customer. Like somebody paid you for that idea, right? That you have a product or you have a service, and they're actually willing to pay you for it. And it's intoxicating if you're an entrepreneur. You're like, my God, my idea is great. I want a second customer. And then a business is started, right? And with the guidance of the mentors who are really acting kind of as a board of directors, they're not telling the entrepreneur what to do, they're guiding them to make the right decisions and asking them lots of questions and making sure that they are the CEO. They're the ones who are making those final decisions and that they're the right ones, hopefully. And if they're not, they quickly pivot and make adjustments as they go. That's the normal part of building a business. You make mistakes, you learn from it, you move forward. And that's how the mentors can be really, really helpful to these entrepreneurs. Any questions or comments?
I just want to talk a little bit about the demand for this. I do the employment education program.
Give your name for the record.
Sure, Donna Marceau. Thank you. I run the employment education program at the Nashua Soup Kitchen and Shelter, and I deal with a lot of homeless people. But just last week, I had one of our homeless person who's been there, I would say maybe since Tom's been in that position, since Tom was in that position, is a continual person, and now he wants to start a business, a cleaning business. So this is something that he would be able to do. And also, I worked at the Work Ready program at Nashua Community College, and one of the persons started a business from that, and now she's in the farmers market, Sweet Cheeks. So, so it is something that people want to do. People do aspire to it.
I have no idea what she's talking about because everybody I worked with is fine now and they're all rich.
Good job.
On.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. All right, next up. So I mentioned before some statistics on the demographics of the folks that come through our program. And so I'll just say them so that you can all hear it in the microphone. But so 73% women-owned, 59% previously unemployed. This is when they come to us. 57 minority, 52% immigrant. Now, these statistics are higher numbers than any of our existing locales that we run our program in. We are in 7 different metropolitan areas in Massachusetts. So Lowell, Lawrence, Lynn, Fall River, New Bedford, all of Cape Cod, and Holyoke. And as you look at the demographics of each of those segments, they vary, right? Lawrence is very heavily Latino and Hispanic. Lowell has an incredible hodgepodge of folks from different backgrounds. The Cape has much lower percentages on the ethnicity area, but has a lot of folks who I would call working poor, who can find that sort of up and down work I described before and barely hanging on because the real estate costs are so high. So each community is unique. And so when we look at a community, we set targets for ourselves to at least equal, but preferably be considerably higher in terms of the percentages that come from these sorts of segments. Whether you're a minority, immigrant, woman, we want those numbers to be higher than what the community currently has, right? So that's the proactive outreach efforts that we can very quickly see how we're doing. And if our numbers don't equal those numbers, then we have a board of advisors that's there to chart the progress of that program, and it's up to them to then work with the 2-person team and make sure that they redouble their efforts to build up those percentages.
Just to confirm,
Yeah.
that board of directors will be something that you'll form from the local community that you are in,
Completely
right?
local, yes. So, and the 2-person team is also expected to be hired locally, with a preference that at least one of them be representative of a major subset of the community. Could be from a particular immigrant group or ethnic group, to make sure that that helps in the outreach efforts. But we found that to be critical. So, questions or comments based on?
Question: Why is food a big draw?
So many folks who come to our program are first, second, third generation immigrants. And so one of the main things that they bring to this country is their own customs, and food is part of that. And they want to share it. And there's these days an insatiable appetite among those of us who have been here for longer than that to try foods from different regions. And so it's a nice way for folks to take something that comes naturally to them to turn it into a product or service that they can leverage. So yeah, that's
Makes good sense.
yeah.
Thank you.
Good question. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
Do you envision a relationship between the Chamber of Commerce and your organization with regards to finding mentors or networking?
Yeah, we do. We've met with the chamber and had very very positive reception from them, including like forming, if I remember, Krishna, a subcommittee to literally address this particular issue. So yeah, that's absolutely. In particular for mentors, they can be enormously helpful.
Yeah, so we had a presentation with the chamber, and Amir Tusi, the president of the chamber at this time, is part of our steering committee.
When you speak, make sure you say your name first, please.
Sorry?
When you speak, please say your name first.
Oh, this is
The-
Krishna Manchapudi.
Thank you. The transcriber she
Yeah.
won't remember all
Yeah.
of these. Thank you.
Yep.
Stephen Michon. I should mention also, David hasn't mentioned yet, maybe you will, but we have a core working group here of folks from Nashua. Krishna Manjapudi, myself, Stephen Michon, Kyle Schneck, Jay Dinkle, who's with Enterprise Bank, Joe Foster, who is an attorney with McLean, and who am I missing?
John Lombard.
John Lombard from Hollis, who's a financial manager in Hollis. And so we're actually partly building that team right now, but that's the team that's been working for the past year to sort of scope this out, do the due diligence. We identified the need together.
There's a couple
this
of
is an
more people,
opportunity,
just
yeah.
so that I can mention them. Michael Ranka from the Soup Kitchen, and I invited Donna to be here on their behalf. Thank you for being here. And then Rabbi John Spira, he's also on the steering committee. So just to give you an idea, the steering committee came about from Mayor Donches's roundtable that he had about 8 months ago, talking about things that we could do better in New Hampshire for Nashua. And I was part of that steering committee. And while on that steering committee discussion, 3 topics came up as the areas of focus that we'd focus on. One of them was the art center, and the other one was to see how we could improve, just apply something like E for All and improve the opportunities for people that are in the opportunity gap, if you will. And so that's how I came into it. And basically from there on, I met with Kyle and Steven and kind of built up steam and momentum behind this. And we were able to get it to the point where now we have David engaged in it.
Okay. So I mentioned Danaris on the first slide. So let me give you a story. So it helps to put you a little bit into context. So Danaris, as I mentioned, lived in Lawrence, still does. She and her husband were both laid off in the after effects of the last recession, which began roughly around 2010. And she had multiple children at home, had a mortgage, and fell into, she and her husband both fell into major financial challenges. So defaulting on the mortgage, needed to go on food stamps, and get essentially full government support as they looked for new work. Danaris's mom, who also lives in Lawrence, came by one day and said, "Danaris, I've got some food stamps myself. I want you to have them for your family." And Danaris sort of looked at this and said, "I've got to get myself off of this, relying upon help from other people." And so she took the value of the food stamps and went to the local supermarket and used them instead to buy ingredients to bake flan. And she found a family recipe for flan and made up a bunch of cookie sheets of it and carved it up and started selling it. And so she literally went to ex-colleagues, to neighbors, to family members, and trust me, it's a really, really good recipe. And it took a couple of days, but she ended up selling all of them and sort of looked at her proceeds and said, "I just doubled the value of those food stamps. Like, this is a business. I should be able to do this." And Danaris is the kind of woman who just makes things happen. And so she, from her home, without a permit, started building her business. And right, you cover your ears? Okay, good. Right. It never happens. Trust me. I know it's. And started doing well, like really well. And in fact, started selling her flan through bodegas. And there's many, many bodegas in Lawrence. And so they would take a small sheet and put it on their counter and sell slices. The city found out because it was very public. And so essentially said, that's got to stop. And so she came to E for All at that point and said, I know I've got something here. I got to figure out how to turn it into a business. Can you help? And this is Danaris with limited English. You got to trust me on this. She was translating throughout the whole experience of being in our program, which is a really hard thing to do. But she worked with her mentor team, she worked with her cohort, she worked with the whole program, and sort of built a model and worked with folks in terms of how we're going to get her to run her business outside of the house so that she doesn't have to run into the same kind of issue with the city, and thus has a bigger market that she can reach. And so we encouraged her, the broader community, to look for places where she could find a commercial kitchen and rent out time and space. But unfortunately, in the greater Lawrence area at that time, nothing existed. It was just restaurants, and restaurants aren't a good match for baking because you have too much grease and smells, and so it doesn't make for good baked goods. So she was kind of stuck and trying to figure out what to do next. And this is where the whole community aspect of eForall comes in, because we had, as part of our sort of broader ecosystem, a banker not unlike Kyle, who stepped forward and said, Danaris, like, I've got a way for you to find a space, because her ultimate goal was, her dream was to get her a full bakery that's, on a main street in Lawrence that she could sell her stuff from. And the council was like, please don't do that, because it takes, until you really have a customer base and you've got cash saved up, because you got to sign a long-term lease and you've got to spend extra money to, get the building ready. You're not ready for this. But this banker stepped forward and said, I've got a way for you to get started with your own bakery. You're going to buy a building. And so, with the help of a mortgage from the bank, she bought a retail building downtown in Lawrence. It had 2 openings. One already had a tenant in it, the other side was open. And so the bank believed in her and her business plan and the viability of that piece of real estate. And so the income from that one tenant helped to pay off the mortgage, and she started her business, and she was touch and go for the first few months, but eventually started to be able to pay off the mortgage. And lo and behold, she was underway, and could never be happier. And now, a few years later, 13 employees, including her husband, and looking to move into a new space, hold on to that first building and own it and get income from both sides. But now, because of the revenue and the profit from her business, she can afford a bigger space than the entire building, because she wanted to kick out the tenant at first and take over the whole thing. Not big enough now. So she needs an even bigger building because of her expansion. So look at the ripple effects of that kind of a business, right? Every customer who comes in to see her sees somebody just like them who's made a go of it, right? And she, of course, talks up eForall to anybody who will ask, and which we're very proud of. But she's such an inspiration for folks in the community. She's providing solid jobs for folks, including some of her family members. And now think about her own financial position, as she's now built an asset of this building and an asset of her business at the same time. So she's setting herself up longer term to have perhaps some kind of a nest egg to help her as she considers retirement and or helping her children. Oops, sorry. So a really nice success story from Danaris, and we look for that kind of success from our entrepreneurs to get them sort of thinking about how they can take an idea and turn it into something that really has a dramatic effect in the community and for them at the same time. Any questions or comments on that?
Comment, pretty impressive.
Pretty
impressive.
Yeah.
Just a comment, if I may. What David humbly avoided there was that when the bank came forward with the money and the help, they also looked at who was sponsoring them. So E4All had a part to play in standing by this entrepreneur and saying, we stand by her so the bank can come forward.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
That's awesome.
It is impressive.
All right, great. So next up, so what happens when you have a lot of Danarises, right? And you have some, I call her, she's like a double or a triple. I mean, she's pretty awesome in baseball language. And yes, we've had 1 or 2 grand slams. But we also have a lot of singles and doubles. And so these are the folks who maybe provide employment for themselves, full-time or even part-time, but solid part-time. Or they hire 1 or 2 people, and those are the singles and doubles, right, that are out there. and they add up, right? And so you look at this is from our very first program that we started in English, serving the Lowell and to a certain degree the Lawrence area. But 2018, at the end of the year, we're a little bit above these numbers. 169 businesses launched and over 400 jobs created for those communities. Those numbers are numbers that a community can be really proud of, right? That's economic development. And these is spread out over so many different businesses that if any one of them, for whatever reason, doesn't make it, there's hundreds that are still there, as opposed to if a city makes a very generous commitment to an employer to come, which happens all the time, and absolutely is the right thing to do. You got to make those bets. But then you're kind of on tenterhooks. Like, is the business going to survive? Are they going to continue to grow? What if they leave and find a better deal elsewhere a couple of years later? And I know those things happen, and they must be very heart-wrenching. It can't happen here because you have so many small businesses that are spreading the risk and the reward among themselves. And so these numbers continue to grow because we have a bunch of high flyers who just continue to add on more jobs and more impact as they go. Yeah.
Alderman Clee.
I hate to ask the Debbie Downer question,
No,
but
it's
have
okay.
you had those that have failed?
Of course. Oh, yeah. Right. And so 83% of startups ongoing, which means 17% don't. Right? Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Those are impressive numbers, trust me.
Thanks.
Because I think in the long run, I think we hear that startup companies have more like a 60% or higher failure than this. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a blended average, but we always end up higher than what the national averages
Right,
are,
yeah.
right? Which we're super proud of. And that's, I think, just by measure of the community that we create. So people never feel like they're alone. And so as they're facing challenges, they reach out to their, the folks that they went through in their cohort. They reach out to their mentors. They just like, this is my problem. Can somebody help me solve it? As opposed to if you're just an island and you're having trouble with your business, like how many people do you know you can ask? And it just feels like, crap, I guess I better, call it a day. But we really encourage folks to reach out, preferably well in advance of when it becomes a disastrous problem. Because the one thing they learn is whatever problem they have, other people have the same problem. They are not alone in the challenges. And so that's super comforting for them to feel the trust to be able to share with folks, I'm having trouble with this employee. I feel like I'm wasting my money. What do I do? And so instantly 5 or 10 other business owners can say, this is how we dealt with that particular issue. So they can turn it into a positive.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Kyle Schneck, for me, the most impressive number up there as a lender is the 83% success rate. As a lender taking risk in a business, you're always betting on them to succeed. In addition to that, with E4All, they have one thing that's unique is they have the statistics. They're continually surveying the E4All participants and providing those statistics. And I've talked to some other not-for-profits involved in the community here that provide some of these ongoing supports. The one thing that they're incredibly light on is statistics, and these are real numbers. So.
Yep.
May I?
Go ahead.
Alderman Clee.
Of the 17% that did not continue
Yeah.
on, was that like within the first year? Because that's what we hear more often is new startups within the first year.
Interestingly, it's not the case with us. So as you heard me say before, like we encourage our entrepreneurs, like in that whole first year, to launch and stay with it. And because of the incentive structure we have built in, where every quarter there are more cash awards, like it's in their interest to stay involved and keep that business moving forward, because then they have a chance to win slightly more money from our prize pool. So we get essentially the whole cohort through the full year, which we think is super important, because after a full cycle of a full year, you should be getting some confidence that you're going to be able to make it go. So it's after that is when we really see the small amount that started tailing off.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do you have more?
I do.
Just one more statistic. I mentioned the micro enterprise loan fund. It's part of the revolving loan fund. It's one of the pieces of the revolving. This is Stephen Michon, by the way. Sorry. That Carrie mentioned early on. We have a 0% success rate in lending to our 4 of the micro enterprises we lent to have all failed. So we've lent to 4 micro enterprises. There was another one that was half. We pushed some money around. Now I'm not even sure what that one's doing, but 4 of the 4 that we had 100%. So we have a 0% success rate.
We're gonna
Not
we're
very
gonna
proud of that,
we're gonna
but
turn you into a star. Don't
reality.
worry, me. Okay, almost done. So just so you have an idea of what the budget is. So we have a 2-person staff, an executive director and a program manager. They make up half of the total expenses. The total expenses are $300,000 a year. And so those 2 people don't make a ton of money, but with full benefits, they're good jobs and they work very, very hard. So they are sort of the fulcrum of the whole system. They are bringing in all of the volunteers, all of the entrepreneurs, mentors, specialists, working with the advisory boards, and they report up to a staffer in the headquarters group at E4All, so they get counsel and guidance on how to succeed in their program. The program awards, as you see there, is $51,000 over the course of a year, gets allocated directly to the entrepreneurs. And the HQ services is because those 2-person team, we want them to be as efficient as possible. We provide from our headquarters group a substantial amount that they don't have to. So finance, administration, technical support, marketing support, development support. They don't have to touch any part of billing or collecting of funds. So that's money coming back to us to help defray that cost. And then the last yellow slice is operations / local overhead. Some money is allocated to rent, and then there's literally, when they have meetings, they might have to pay for the space or food, paper, all that kind of stuff. On the right, it shows the different sources of income. And so E4All, because we don't charge our entrepreneurs, we need philanthropic support to survive. And so we knock on all doors. Obviously, here we're knocking on the government aspect. But yes, we call on everybody, and we would look for, in addition to the funds that you all are considering sending to us, support from all these other areas of the community. And we've had a whole bunch of discussions and are making headway in each of these areas locally here in the greater Nashua area.
So if we do allocate this money to you, what's your startup? When do you plan to hit the ground in Nashua? When do you plan to have 2 people hired?
Yep.
And where will you be?
Yep. So we want to get started as soon as we can, but we also need to know that there's some ability for our program to make it beyond a year. Let's put it that way. In other words, if we raise $300,000 and stop there, that would be nail biting for us because the 2-person team that we hire would have to do all the work to build up the program and be fundraising immediately. And that's a lot of responsibility because in the beginning, there's a lot of things to be done. So we actually ask for a 3-year commitment from the community. And based upon people not necessarily having written the check, but looking us in the eye and saying, we got you covered for years 1 through 3, then we feel confident that we can launch and get the program up and going and build the fundraising support over those 3 years so that on an ongoing basis we can keep it going, hopefully indefinitely.
Where do you expect to be in the city? Have you partnered? Have you
So the only thing,
found a home yet?
so I don't have an exact answer for you, but I can just tell you from what we do in each of our cities is that we look for space, preferably we could call it co-working space. So it's got an ability of folks to walk in, sit down at a desk and get some work done. It doesn't have to be very big because we don't find a huge market for that, but it's nice to have that sort of ability to generate a community within that space. So even if it's 1,000 to 2,000 square feet, that's going to be fine for us. We like it to be accessible for our target markets. And so if it's near or in a community that's sort of a little bit more challenged, if you will, that actually works for us. There's a mixture of people who come to us, the mentors, the entrepreneurs, et cetera, so they all have to feel comfortable getting there, but that's what we look for.
Okay.
Okay. Any other
Anyone else have questions?
questions, comments?
Alderman Karen.
Thank you, not to be on Debbie Downer. So you're looking for this to be part of your $300,000.
Mhm.
Have you reached out to any of these foundations and individuals to get some of that money? I mean, if you get this, where are you in that $300,000 capital that you need to get
So
started?
there are lots and lots of conversations underway. It's one of those, like, everybody's kind of looking around. It's like, okay, who's going to sort of make the first commitment and jump on board?
We're
Um,
surprisingly familiar with that.
I'm sure you are. Um, so Mayor Donchis has proposed that this is I think a good use of the funds that have been sort of parked, and feels confident that he's willing to say that this will put that first step forward, and then encourage more participation from all the different segments that you see there. So we have a high confidence level that all the conversations that are underway will sort of step up in intensity based upon this commitment.
Yeah, so this is Krishna Manchapudi, if I may. So we've been at this for close to a year now, and a lot of conversations have happened in a lot of different contexts, including going to the Chamber of Commerce and talking to them. And we see this as being a very viable public-private partnership that will take off from here. And part of the story that he told you there was, what we're looking for in the initial phases to get this program up and going in this community, which is for him to see into the horizon that this is viable and they can do it. And once they make that commitment, once he can get that commitment and confidence that this can happen, then they go out and set up shop. And from that point on forward, they're doing all the things that he talked about. And in addition to that, they're going to be looking to see how to sustain this program beyond those 2 years that he talked about. Raising funds, reaching out to people, reaching out in the community. And so we step out of the way and let them do the job from that point on forward to keep it going. So that is their sustainability model. That's how they've survived for the 7 years that they've been in business in these 6 or 7 communities that they have established themselves.
Thank you. Alderman Lopez.
So I guess I have a question for Carrie, Director Schema. I'm sorry, I forget your title.
That's okay. Urban Programs Manager.
Manager Schema. Okay. So
Barry's fine.
some of this money, like almost half of it, is coming out of surplus from 2 projects that weren't completed for various reasons as part of the drawing another blank CDBG.
CDBG, it's the,
But it's not just the CDBG; it's also the Citizens Advisory Committee.
No,
No, it's
these
just
funds are
CDBG.
strictly CDBG.
Just CDBG. Okay, so that was part of my question. Is number one, do we regularly have this kind of surplus that we would plan the extra 70,000 or an extra 35,000 out of the 45 that we had? Do we anticipate the return on this adding to the program, or are we like the economic development loans repayment account, or are we thinking next year it'll be 70,000 that we have to use? And then my third question was kind of answered. I was concerned about if the committee decides that it's going to be spent on these particular organizations, does it go back to that CDBG process again, given that we have like twice as much applicant as we have funding?
well, this is outside the cycle of our regular CDBG funding, so Carrie can answer your questions, but
Yeah. I'll try. There was a few in there.
Mhm.
So first, we generally do see funds that need to be reprogrammed from year to year. Typically at the start of our annual process, which sometimes is January, but it'll be February this year. I put the applications forward to this committee, Human Affairs Committee, and we have the estimate of what our annual grant will be and then also what funds are available for reprogramming. That is a standard that gets folded in each year. It's we don't like it, but it is common that on occasion somebody, an entity who applies for funds after the fact, something happened and the project fell through. Other cases more typically are, as I said, in the case of Salvation Army, that they had a certain amount allocated to them, but the project actually came in under budget. So that project was completed, it's just we had excess funds that had been allocated. So each year that does roll forward. So part of these funds were sitting there and would have been reprogrammed in the upcoming cycle. Salvation still actually there's a few $1,000s more left in addition to what's referenced in this resolution. The other part of the question, I think, was as far as their future funding. E4All did submit an application in this funding cycle, which again will be before the Human Affairs Committee in February when they start to deliberate all of the outside applications. And that was, I think David was looking for a total of 150 over a 3-year period. So this would be 70 for year one. And then the application that was just recently submitted, the deadline was just last Thursday. And that was for years 2 and 3 of $40,000 each, which would be before the committee next month.
Alderman Lopez.
So we wouldn't be anticipating another 40,000 of recovered loans from economic development because that gets rolled into the process moving forward.
Correct. Yeah. So under this model, it's not loans that would be given out. The funding would be changed. It would still be assisting micro enterprise, which was the original purpose. Under the original structure, it was straight. The business would come in and say, "I need $20,000 to start my bakery or whatever," and hopefully they'd make some repayment. As Stephen referenced, out of the 4 that were initially assisted, none of the businesses survived. There was repayment, though, because obviously we had some money in there before they failed. They did make some repayments on those loans. But, those funds have truly been sitting stagnant for about 7 years without an active loan that's gone out for any number of reasons: marketing, viability, underwriting, identifying businesses. So we don't have the capacity within the city to do that. So changing the funds from the loan pool to this model, you're not getting any program income coming back, but you're accelerating the number of entities that are assisted. I think the initial loan fund had a little over $100,000 that went out, and 120, I believe, and of that, about the 46 was repaid. So, some of the statistics that they've shown here, it kind of changes the focus. So yeah, you're not getting the program income back, but you're multiplying the effect of who is assisted and what that overall community and economic benefit is.
So Alderman Lopez, typically the money from Bridges and the Salvation Army would just roll into the entitlement grant that we get and that we deliberate in February. So typically that would just come in, Carrie would identify those funds, and we'd add them to the pot of money that we divvy up for all of the applicants.
And there are other funds still to be reprogrammed.
Okay, do you know how much?
I do. Roughly about 6,000 at this time. It's not a huge amount.
Alderman Lopez?
So my understanding of the process was basically informing my concern that there's not a lot of money to go around. It's already a very difficult decision deciding which programs, have merit, which ones don't. This committee will go on tours and really put a lot of work into vetting what the best way to spend it is. And this basically represents a gigantic investment in that scene, because you're removing the surplus that would have gone into this year's entitlements. You're also including this in an entitlement for next year, in the competition pool, I guess, for next year, and then the following year as well, without having any benefit of revenue coming in from anywhere else to support it. So, I mean, I'm not on the committee, so I don't have to make that decision. I was just anticipating that it's going to be some pretty difficult decisions made moving forward, depending on what needs the traditional applicants present.
Right.
But I do not have any doubts that we will probably have a much more effective program overall in terms of entrepreneur development than we've had. I mean, we have one economic development director. He isn't able to vet new programs just to sheer amount of workload, and the results that we've had over the past, couple of years, even when there were 2, aren't super encouraging. So I'm completely impressed by the E4All model and accomplishments. I'm just wondering about the source being used.
typically I find that when something new comes to town, once the city buys in, you know, like the city shows that they're buying into this, sometimes leverages other funding. Wouldn't you say that?
Definitely.
I mean, because we're the city.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, I think what I'm getting out of your concern is that it's not going head to head with the other, competing with the other applicants.
Well, particularly for this cycle, it's not. Like, it's
Right, it's on its own.
ahead of the
Right,
process, but
right.
then it is competing in this year's process for next year,
Right.
and then the next year as well. So, in a way, that deck is a little bit stacked too, because are we going to put the first year's money in and then not approve the next 2 years?
Right. Well, that's a decision the committee will have to make. Alderman Clee and then Alderman Karen.
Actually, that was my question. We usually do it year by year, and we look at each one as the merits, where they're looking for a 3-year commitment.
They're
Okay.
not looking for a 3-year commitment today.
No, but they're looking for a 3-year commitment from the city for the project. So if we did, is that not what you said?
That's correct.
That's what I
Yep.
wrote.
Yep.
So they are looking for a 3-year overall commitment.
Right.
So if we did the 70, are we committing to 40 and 40?
Absolutely not. No, that's not in this legislation.
I know, but I'm just
Okay.
saying, as he was speaking, he was looking for a 3-year commitment.
No, I
It's my-
understand that.
And don't get me, oh, keep hitting this, I'm so sorry.
That's
And
not
don't
just
get
me.
me wrong, I truly, I love this project. I think
Mhm.
it's a great project.
It
It's
is
got
a
a lot
great
of merit for it, and I'm all for it. But I just was concerned about if we're giving a statement that we're promising 40,000 and then we're promising another 40,000.
No,
Okay, so
we're
we're
not
just looking at
promising-
the 70 and that's it.
This
I mean,
stands
the
by
le- the-
itself tonight. I mean,
Yeah.
when their application comes through the regular process, you know, certainly we'll discuss that.
The letter that was attached from Carrie does specifically state that a total of 70,000 is recommended for the first year, with subsequent funding for 40,000 each in years 2 and 3. Application to be submitted through annual action plan.
That is
that is-
not in tonight's legislation, is
Oh,
what
but
I'm
it's in the
saying.
attached letter. That's what I'm
Yes.
saying.
Okay, Carrie.
Right, yeah, no, so I wanted to put that detail in there, just so that it was fully disclosed.
Okay.
That, you know, this 70 is not, you know, they don't want it to be a one-year commitment. And I know Chairman Wilshire referenced the timing, and we've had some conversations about, they'd like to do it as early as this spring, that, you know, ideally have money lined up and start launching this. If this is approved and it moves forward, we also have some administrative tasks where we have to draft the agreement. They'll have significant reporting that they have to do, just like everybody else. I've spoken to some of the other communities where they receive CDBG funds, and you know, at least have a level of assurance that they're familiar with the amount of detail that they're going to have to provide. And timing wise, the resolution for the annual cycle is typically approved by April. The plan is due to HUD by May 15th. I think it will be delayed this year just because there is no budget, and right now we have a shutdown. But we always aim for that timeline anyway. So, you know, by April, this committee will have had a chance to discuss the additional years. And, you know, that might be part of the overall voter conversation as well of what the whole future is going to look like.
Alderman Lopez.
I'm just thinking, so the general sense is that looking at the whole scope of this project, that we're probably going to need to be looking at somehow producing around 70,000, I think, for 3 years. And we have a working plan for now, which includes this legislation. But there's also the component of fundraising and development. And while you want to be receptive to not placing undue burden on your administrative staff or your organizing staff in their first year, their second and their third years might be considerably more successful. I mean, if your flagship model is somebody who is able to bake food for money, you're going to find a lot of opportunity in the tree streets. Like, there's a lot of little closet bakeries that maybe we don't want to tell the health department about, but if they
We
went
didn't hear it.
mainstream, then there would be, and this is kind of the advent of like mobile app home delivery for food and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of opportunities, and if those things came together in what's essentially a new market for you guys, would you reduce your expectation from the shelter if things were going really well, or not shelter, the city, if things were going really well?
Uh, the success of our businesses doesn't. I'm sorry, it's David Parker.
Thank you.
Doesn't affect our need for capital. I think I'm saying the right thing there from your perspective. Like, we have a wonderful success of our businesses, as you saw on that prior slide, but that doesn't make our economics change. We still have to find $300,000. It's easier because
It's
we
like you'll
have
get more sponsors.
we get more sponsors, right? But we have to knock on a lot of doors. It's not a slam dunk. And as Krishna mentioned, we've been knocking on doors for a while, and so this is a real breakthrough for us to have a commitment from the city saying in all of our sort of public perspection, we believe in this and think that your program is the right one for our community. So we think that's going to be a huge help. We know it's going to be a huge help in getting additional support from outside places. That kind of work continues. So, like, we have to hustle to get that 300K every year, no matter how successful our program in each of our cities. It's certainly easier when we can start tossing around these numbers and say this is what we've done literally here in the greater Nashua area. But we still have to knock on a lot of doors. So.
Alderman Karen. Sorry.
My thunder, Alderman Lopez. A lot of the questions that Alderman Lopez asked Kerry, I was going to ask. But as the member of the CAC that reviews 30-some-odd applications, you had my brain flipping, that this resolution, we're giving, if we approve this, we're giving you $70,000 to get started, but you have put in an application for next year's funding, which starts in July. Is that what I'm understanding? So basically, you're getting funding twice within, even though it doesn't start till July, obviously, because we don't have the money, but you're getting some funding ahead of the actual meetings that we're going to have to discuss the 35 agencies and their requests. I think this is a great idea. That's just my concern, because we have a lot of agencies that are small and that require the city's support in order for them to do what their due diligence to get other people to sponsor them. So that really kind of rocks my boat. I want to say, yeah, go. But on the other hand, I sit there for hours on end reviewing applications and debating how much to give someone when we're looking at almost $1 million worth of requests this year. This is really tough for me because I'm saying, okay, I'm putting a resolution in for you, but we don't do it for everybody else, and you're still putting in an application. So it's not a reflection, because I think it looks like you've succeeded with all of these small businesses, and that's what we want. We want success. But this part of it is really weighing on me, I have to say. So I was just, when you said that, they put the application, because I haven't seen all the apps, and I went, oh my God, now what does that do for us? And what does that do for the agencies that are asking for money? So, and Carrie's going to give me an answer, and then I can go home. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Carrie. So this is actually a specific activity that's eligible in the regulations as microenterprise development, which is separate from the human services. It's not part of that 15% cap. So just as a point of clarity, the application that they did submit will be before Human Affairs Committee in the general pool of CDBG. It won't be in what they used to call review and comment, now the Citizens Advisory Commission. And again, it's a niche in the HUD regulations that specifically call out microenterprise development. And as far as the timing, we looked at, you mentioned that, they'd be getting year one money now, so to speak. and then again in July 1st, but it actually wouldn't work that way. If they were to receive the funding now, their year one would be when their year one starts. Year two, which is what they've submitted for, as we all know, we're starting to talk about CDBG now for next fiscal year. That money's really not available for about a year. By the time HUD signs our grant agreements, it used to be September, October. This past year, it was November that we signed agreements with them. So although we're starting the process now for an application that's due in the spring to HUD, that money won't be available. So when we looked at the timing, I looked at the timing and said, do they need to apply this year or could they hold off until next year's cycle? But that would have ended in a gap. So we would look at it, and they're not going to get the money unless they're actually spending it. So there'll be an agreement. It'll say, it's for this position, X number of hours, X number of dollars, and they'll have to submit for reimbursement for that. So the money will stretch. It's not going to line up with our fiscal year per se, but we'll report those accomplishments in each of our years as they occur. And David, I don't know if you have it handy, some of the numbers you had provided me about what this 70,000 will serve. If you don't, I have it in front of me.
I don't have it in front of me, but why don't you go ahead and remind us?
Okay, so this 70,000, and my phone doesn't want to cooperate. Hold on, sorry. Would be broken down between 50,000 would be for the personnel expenses, which be those two positions David mentioned, and then 20,000 of it would be the grants to the qualified entrepreneurs. And he said that in the first year, they would expect to do 3 pitch contests with 50 entrepreneurs. And of that, 20 of them would go into the accelerator program. And then there's statistics on, who they expect to reach, majority of them being low to moderate income, and 60% women, 40% minority, and 10% immigrants. And so again, with the CDBG funds, as we all know, it is very restricted to who is eligible and how that gets reported out. So again, they're going to have to meet benchmarks and goals, submit for reimbursement, and then get the money back. CDBG is never a blank check up front, much to people's dismay.
Alderman Clee and then Alderman Lopez.
Okay, I just have a kind of a quick question of clarity here. You spoke and said that we had done 4 micro enterprise. Is that correct way to put it, with a 0 success rate?
I think it was 4. I actually mentioned the number in the memo
Okay.
as well that I don't have.
I guess I missed that there, but in any respect, they've got an 83% success rate, but the difference here is we'd be giving them the 70,000 from the revolving fund. Is that the way it works? It doesn't get paid back with interest much like these other companies would. So there's no revenue that comes from the 70,000. We basically give it to them. It's gone. It's out of the revolving fund.
Correct.
And does that get, pardon my lack of knowledge here, but does that get replenished with each grant year?
This is Carrie again. So some of the activities that we do generate income. The revolving loan fund was one of them. Like I said, they were loans that went to the businesses, and it may have been a 2-year, 5-year loan, whatever it was structured at. Some of them made repayments, and as you mentioned, none of them actually survived. So we ended up writing off a significant portion of that money. Those loans were designed to be risky by nature. They were not bankable businesses to start with. That's the whole point of CDBG. So under this model, this would not be a revenue generating or income producing CDBG activity. It would be a grant, much like most of the money that we put out into the community. The only other income producing activity that we have, and when I say income, it's program income that comes back to the pool of CDBG, is the housing rehab program, and those are structured as loans, and homeowners repay that when they sell their property. So it's not, CDBG doesn't have a lot. We're not in the business to generate money, but it is nice to, when we get those homeowner rehab, it goes back into the pool.
May I have so I guess I have more of a comment here. Personally, I'd like to see the $70,000 go where it's going to really go out there and spread in the community and work for it than us taking a risk on 4 businesses that didn't survive. And in the end, we gain nothing as a city and we gain nothing for the fund. So, I mean, that, I just wanted to make that statement that I do agree with what Alderman Karen said. My concern too was that this is taking away from another, but you said it's not within that same venue, is that correct?
It's not considered what CDBG calls a public service, or we call human services. So it's not in the group with the Citizens Advisory
That 15% cap.
15%,
But
correct.
but it does,
And the overall.
in the overall applications for CDBG,
Right.
because those were just, the deadline was just, what, a week or so ago for,
Thursday.
yeah.
This past Thursday.
So
So-
if we prove this at $70,000 out of the entire pool of whatever, is that
No,
correct?
this is a different pool of money.
This is last year's money that would have been rolled over into
Correct.
this year's money. So
Correct.
that's why I'm saying it pulls it away from what would have been rolled into. So
Correct.
I just
And
don't
for
want to,
competing with the other organizations.
right.
Yeah.
So we
Yep.
would pull it out of rolling it over. We'd use it for this year's funding, from this year's funding. Is that correct?
If that's the committee's will.
Yeah, if we,
Yeah,
if we went on forward. Thank you.
Yep. Alderman Lopez.
I don't think all of it would have rolled over because the revolving loan fund still would be sitting there
Right.
pointlessly.
Well,
So we're talking about $30,000 of money that would have rolled back into the general competition. And ultimately, the reasoning behind having to do it that way this year is because the government is slow and we needed a cheat code to actually take advantage of this now, because any competition of money or any CDBG money that is approved, by the committee moving forward isn't going to get there until next year. I mean, you can't really argue with the success rate. And if you look at our $100,000 or so that we put in to get 4 businesses that failed and recoup 40% of it, that's not really generating revenue. It's like planting flowers on a grave. So I think it makes more sense to create the
Such a
revenue out
colorful
of like
picture.
the community's development as the block grant intends, getting entrepreneurs into the Crown Hill and Milliard and Tree Street areas to start generating revenue and moving away from being on government assistance and moving towards employing others and building their own assets, obviously is the point and the purpose of this whole thing. And I would also point out that this is the time to do it, really, because the economy is still chugging along. It is a good time to invest, and people do have a little more discretionary money to maybe go for supporting their neighbor's flawn that they like versus going to Market Basket and just sticking with your basics. And I would say, I made a joke earlier about, of course, everybody I ever worked with the soup kitchen is fine and everything has been fixed for them. The reality is a lot of people that you face or that you work with in the soup kitchen are in an emergency situation. And there's a completely worn out metaphor we use all the time, but it's always true, is you can't redecorate your house while it's on fire. So when someone's in an emergency income situation where they have no income, their housing is in jeopardy, or they're worried about taking care of their family, or they're even stuck in a non-productive employment scenario, they can't really look at how do I make a plan for what will work? How do I invest my dream in a mentored model and start moving forward in life and advancing? So as long as I worked at the soup kitchen, a program like this was kind of lacking. Like we needed more business supports because there were always people who had models that would have been completely fine if they were year round. Maybe they worked in landscaping or maybe they worked in construction, and for 8 months of the year they're doing fine, and then for 4 months they're getting nothing. So that is a good balance where maybe a home business or an entrepreneurial activity, they have the time to really invest in developing and creating an idea and moving it forward, and it might make them a little less dependent on whatever literally the weather is doing. So I mean, I have some mixed feelings about the source. I would say as alderman, it seems like we haven't found that bank account full of money that we haven't been using. It's like we're kind of digging at the bottom of everything lately, but it seems like a really good investment. I hope the committee considers passing it forward.
Anything else? Okay, Okay, well, thank you. We will take up the resolution, and you can have a seat in the audience, or you can leave, whatever you'd like to do. Thank you for answering all our questions. Thank you for the presentation.
Just turn off my
And to the
mic.
Board of Aldermen, this is Krishna Manchpudi. I'd like to thank you all for giving us this opportunity to come here and present to you, and also thank you for your time.
Thank you. Could we get a copy of that presentation at some point? Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, so the motion before us by Alderman Clee is to recommend final passage. Discussion on that motion. Alderman Karen.
I think this is a wonderful idea, and I don't have a problem using the revolving loan fund balance because, you know, we're not getting people coming forward, and this looks like a group that would be very helpful. My two concerns is the other 30,000 that we could put back into some of those applications that are coming forward. And the other thing is, and I appreciate Carrie's memo where she's talking about another $40,000 for the next 2 years. It's almost like making a commitment, and, you know, as on the other side, the other committee that deals with the other agencies, you know, we've talked about setting up so that it would be a 2 or 3 year process, that they would get X amount of money, but we really can't do that because we never know how much money we're going to get, which makes it very difficult for us. So I'm in a quandary here because my feeling was to amend this and to just give them the amount from the micro enterprise fund and to delete section 2 and 3 of the resolution, but, you know, that's just my feeling at this point in time. It's not anything against the group. It's just what's transpiring, yes, what's happening now and what we're looking to do in the next 2 months. So,
So is that your motion, Alderman Karen?
yeah, you know, I would like to amend it that we give them the balance from the revolving fund, but to delete section 2 and 3 and let that go back to be part of the other resolution that we'll be getting for CBG money and funding. But
Alderman Clee, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I guess because of the way this works, and every 2 years we change a good portion of this board. And the one thing I've learned from being a state rep is you can't hold the feet, you know, the next group board feet to the fire. So I have no problem with approving it, the 70,000. I just don't want to make promises that we can't possibly keep and give the city a black eye. I don't know whether or not they would feel comfortable with us saying we approve this, but no guarantees for the next year. You have to resubmit and so on, as we do with anything. And it would be nice if we can make 2-3 year commitments for any group going forward. But because we never know how much funding we're going to get, we never know how much any of that. I feel comfortable with doing the 70,000, but not no promises made.
Right, and there are no promises
Right,
in
I know,
this-
but I'm
in
just
this
saying is I don't want to
legislation.
indicate that there's any
Okay.
promises made.
Alderman Lopez.
I might have a question for Carrie again.
Carrie,
but-
can
So
you-
my question is, well, I mean, if you could just say no. If it was amended and only the revolving loan fund was approved at this time, could the board just revisit it? Like, could there be a model where the CDBG money is presented with the money in place, or could the total CDBG amount be withheld? I don't know if you have to report how much is left over at a certain point, and then that goes into a pot or something.
I'm not sure I followed you. I'm sorry.
Do they have to commit the extra 40,000 from, or the, sorry, 37 something from
23.
the CDBG overages? Does that have to be committed now for any particular reason? Or can they look at the submissions that are coming in and then say, yeah, we'll do it now?
No, there's no hard rule that says we have to roll it forward at any given point. And sometimes there are projects that are kind of in limbo for a couple of years before we even know, and that money's sitting out there. The other thing I wanted to mention earlier, but the opportunity didn't present itself, was that this year's contingency also ended up higher than what was anticipated. At the time when the aldermen were working on the CDBG budget, it was an estimate. We didn't know what the final grant was going to be. That when the final grant number came in, and as we normally do is if it's lower, we adjust contingency down, and if it's higher, it goes up. So this year in fiscal year 19, contingency is at like about 47,000, which is quite high. So that is a number that I would have again included next month when I'm here for consideration. And perhaps again, it's just shifting hats or pots of money, but if it's a more comfortable thing to say that it could come out of this year's contingency. I mean, it's again, you're just kind of shifting the money around, but those funds will be rolled forward as well.
So right now, today, there's $47,000 in CDBG contingency.
47,409.
That's a healthy sum.
That makes
Right.
it slightly easier for you
Yeah.
guys to make a decision.
It makes a lot easier to make a decision.
Typically, I think that hovers around 5,000 to 7,000 on any given year.
Wow.
Should I
Alderman
stay?
Maria Gaffrey, did you have your hand up? No?
I got it. It's an answer.
Okay, answer.
I just needed the.
Alderman Karen,
Then I'll pull my,
you're going to rescind your motion?
Yes.
Okay. So the motion before us is to recommend final passage. I will not be voting on this. My employer has applied for future funding. Not this year, it's not really in contention with this money, but I won't be voting. So, motion Alderman Clee.
No, I wanted to make sure, so the motion is for the 70,000.
The motion is for the 70,000.
Which would be the 46,846 from the revolving fund, the 13,800 from the bridges, and the 9,291 from the Salvation Army. Is that correct? That's the way this reads.
That's correct.
So,
Further discussion on the motion for final passage? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
aye.
Opposed? And that motion carries. Congratulations, E for all. Still has to go to the full board.
Yes. This is only the first step.
New business ordinances.
Thank you.
None, sorry.
General discussion. Public comment. Remarks by Alderman. Alderman Harriet Gathright.
I just want to say that I was quite impressed as well with the slides and everything and their success rate. And it's just amazing. And if
Yes.
something like that here in Nashua, I think would go a long way.
I agree. I think they did a great presentation. I think their numbers look really good.
Yes.
I was impressed with the 83,000, I mean,
83%?
yeah,
17%.
83% because I do know I have a friend who just started a small business and she took a small course and they out and out said that within a year, I think there's over a 60% failure rate, and by 2, it's even higher, and that the food industry was one of the worst. So to hear what their success was with this was just amazing.
Alderman
I
Karen.
think it's also good that it's out of our hands and into someone else who can really donate 100% of their time to
Yeah.
this, where we're not getting people coming forward to look for this funding. So I don't see that as a problem.
I agree.
So-
I think it's a good use of, and it's like for like, right? I mean, these
Yes.
monies were going to be used for that,
Yeah.
except instead of being a loan, it's a grant, which I think will really
Yes.
carry better throughout our community.
My only thoughts with that is the issue with marketing that we have as a city does seem to have a problem, really.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, which I should have asked them, what's so different about their marketing plan? But we'll get a chance.
Well, they'll be
Again,
back,
right?
they'll
Yeah.
be back, they'll be back before.
That's what I was just gonna say. They've got bodies that have the time.
Okay,
We're all supposed to be the feet on the ground.
yeah. No non-public, do I have a motion? Alderman Karen,
Motion to adjourn.
motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned at 8:40. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes. That one.